and welcome to our session called Coping with Thoughts: How to Respond to the Racing Mind and All the Other Things That Our Mind Does. My name is Jackie Butt, and I'm a social worker with the NL Groups program within the Mental Health and Addictions program of NL Health Services. I'm happy to bring this session to you today, which is offered normally through our Wellness Wednesday sessions on Wednesday evenings from 6 to 8. These sessions are being recorded so that you can watch them at your own leisure and from the comfort of your own home. You also can feel free to watch these videos with a loved one or support person so that you can learn the information and have discussions together. I'd like to take the opportunity to give you some validation and support around taking the time to watch this video. One of the important things in our mental health is being able to access accurate learning and to be able to learn skills and tools to help us improve our mental health. So for you to take the time today to sit and watch this video, you're in the process of doing that, and I want to just acknowledge that for you. As you do watch this video, it can be helpful to give yourself permission to pause the video at times. There is a lot of information that we're going to cover over this session. So if you want to stop the video and just reflect on the material and the learning, that's totally okay. You can watch this session even over days. You don't have to watch it all at one time. You also can rewind, of course, and rewatch parts that may be especially challenging or important to you in your own learning. And you might also want to pause and just do some reflection through writing. So having a paper and pencil available as you watch the video can be helpful. We will be doing some practices and giving you some time to actually try things as you watch the video. And so with that, I also will really encourage you to actually take the time to do those practices. They can be really helpful to bring the information into action for you rather than just being something you learn intellectually. If you actually practice the tools, you may be able to see how they can work in your day-to-day life. So those are some little beginning points as you settle in. Just get comfortable and sit back and just hopefully find this session to be informative for you and to help add to your tools and your knowledge to support your own mental health. So we're going to start with just getting ourselves thinking about our thoughts and how they have impacted us and how they intersect with our mental health. So you can just start by thinking about for yourself, have your thoughts caused you problems or been difficult to deal with? When we look at mental health and when I work with people in our groups or in individual therapy, really consistently, perhaps all the time, it would be safe to say people are identifying struggles with their thoughts and how they cope with their thoughts. It's probably one of the main things that people identify along with their emotions is the difficulty in how to deal with the thoughts that they have in their head. So just for you to think about, what does that look like for you in your life? What have been your experiences with your thoughts and how your brain kind of processes information or deals with information on a day-to-day basis? Some of the common things that people have identified, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but just some of the things that are really common. People identify feeling like my mind just won't quiet down and I wish I could just stop thinking. So we feel like if we could just stop the thoughts, if we could just have a blank slate in our mind, then we'd feel much better and life would be a lot easier. So the opposite of that for people is struggling, is that they feel like their mind's always racing and it's constantly filled with not just one thought, but multiple thoughts. And sometimes those thoughts are, that's why we use the term the racing mind. We feel like our mind is constantly racing. Another way our thoughts can cause some struggle for us is that we feel like we're often reliving or stuck on painful memories or painful thoughts. So when we are noticing our mind or our mind is active, what we often might notice is that it's reliving painful events in our life. We can be thinking of it like a movie replaying in our brain, or just kind of words or images that can come into our mind. We also can be stuck on painful thoughts like I'm not good enough, or nothing ever works for me, or, what's wrong with me, those types of things. So we kind of get stuck. We sometimes call that ruminating. We get stuck on thoughts. We also can struggle with worries about the future. So, kind of opposite to reliving the past. Sometimes we can get stuck in thoughts about the future. We sometimes will call those what ifs. So, what if this happens? What if that happens? And usually, when our brain, our mind goes into those what ifs, it's not usually thinking about best case scenario. It's often thinking about the worst case scenario, which kind of ties into the next point of fearing the worst. So our brain is, kind of generating thoughts that are around what is the worst thing that's going to happen to us. And we'll look at that a little bit more as we look at the types of thoughts and why we have these types of thoughts. Another type of thought that we can often struggle with is various forms of putting ourselves down. So often we are our own worst critic, and the things that we say to ourselves, we would never say to another person out loud. But in this internal dialogue we have going inside of our head, for many people, it's very critical. In fact, for some people, even abusive, the things that they say to themselves. We also have there again, I guess it's a little bit redundant, but anticipating and expecting the worst. So kind of tying into the worries about the future and fearing the worst. Sometimes people thoughts, even in each moment of the day are around anticipating something bad happening. It might not be even a specific thing. It just can be like a general dread or general worry about like what's going to go wrong. So sometimes the thoughts might be specific worries about the future or fearing the worst in a specific situation. For other people, their thoughts might be like just around, what is going to happen? Something's going to go wrong. And, this anticipation of that. We also can get caught in thoughts about worrying about how others see us, how we're seen by other people, and believing that we are being judged and seen in a negative lens. So, again, often when we're thinking about how other people see us, we're not thinking about like, oh, they see this positive quality in me or they see this strength. We're usually thinking about like, am I good enough? Do people like me? Or we may, again, to go further, be specific around thinking about evidence of like how people don't like us or how we're not good enough. Another example of a thought that we can struggle with is thinking that nothing's going to improve. So when we're going through difficult times in life, which are, something that everyone experiences, and not just once, usually like for most people, there's multiple times through lifetimes that through our lifetime that we will go through really challenging and hard times. So when we're in those difficult times, if we have the thought that nothing's going to get better, this is the way it's going to always be, then that's a really challenging thought to have. And as I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list. There's many other ways that our thoughts can cause us struggle. So if there's something else that you are identifying for yourself, could be a variation of one of these examples, or it could be something, even a little bit different. Just know that it's really normal for us as human beings to have thoughts and thought patterns and things going through our brain that are very difficult and challenging at times. So we want to understand, why do we have these thoughts? Most of us, when we struggle like this, we think that there's something wrong with us. And that is a thought in and of itself that can cause problems. So when we have a thought, there's something wrong with me, that would be an example of putting ourselves down. We often then struggle even more because we feel like we're pathological or defective or, different, or again, that there's something not right with how we think. So we want to be able to understand, why do we have these thoughts? When we do groups, group-based therapy, this is often a really helpful thing to realize through the experience of being in a group. And we hear other people saying things out loud that we ourselves have thought or felt inside. We really get to understand that we're actually more alike than we think we are. We often have more in common with other people than we are different. So we can get to experience in real time, like, well, I don't think there's something wrong with that person. And if they think like me, maybe there's nothing wrong with me either. It doesn't mean, again, that those thoughts are not painful or that we don't want to do anything about how we think, but it just means that there's nothing wrong with our brain or how we think. So why do we experience so many painful thoughts? We're going to watch a video now that starts to answer this question, and we'll elaborate on this video and the content as we go through the rest of this session. But this video is a little helpful scenario or helpful beginning to lay some of the foundation to understand that it's not arbitrary or not based on anything, like why our brain and our mind has so many of these challenging types of thoughts. So let's take a look at this video. There might be a commercial at the beginning, so when it comes up, I will skip it. So just be prepared in case it does come up with a commercial first.
The human mind has evolved to think in such a way that it naturally creates psychological suffering. You see, back in the Stone Age, 200,000 years ago, life was pretty dangerous for our caveman ancestors. So if a caveman or cavewoman wanted to survive, their minds had to constantly be on the lookout for things that might hurt or harm them. And if that cave person's mind wasn't good at predicting, spotting, or avoiding danger, what happened to her? The default setting of the caveman mind was safety first, and we in the modern world have inherited this. Our modern minds are constantly warning us of things that might hurt or harm us. The caveman mind says, watch out, there might be a bear in that cave, you could get eaten. Watch out, that shadow on the horizon might be an enemy from another clan, you could get speared. Our modern mind then does worrying, predicting the worst, avoiding anything that scares you, anxiety in all of its different forms. Back in caveman days, you survive an encounter with a bear or a wolf, then it's useful to replay it. It's useful for your mind to go over the events and remember what you did to survive so that you're better prepared for next time. But in our modern world, we go over and over painful memories, dwelling on them, reliving them, even when there's nothing useful to learn or the lesson has been well and truly learned a long time ago. In the Stone Age era, as a caveman or cavewoman, you have to fit in with the group. If you are alone, you will soon die. So your mind compares you to others in the group. Am I fitting in? Am I contributing enough? Am I following the rules? Am I doing anything that might get me thrown out? Now, in modern life, we're always comparing ourselves to others. But the problem is we're no longer in a small group. Our groups are enormous today, and we carry with us devices that constantly feed us images and stories of people all over the planet. This constant comparison ramps up our fear of being judged or rejected or not fitting in or just not being good enough. The caveman mind tells you you need more food, you need more water, better weapons, better shelter. The cave people who thought this way lived longer and had more offspring. Unfortunately, in the modern world, this manifests as greed, dissatisfaction, craving, wanting. It's never enough. I need more, more, more. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, these Stone Age thought patterns are intensified by the sheer pace and complexity of modern life. A frantic existence, rushing from task to task, that never-ending to-do list. So when your mind starts doing this unhelpful stuff, as all minds do, remember, it's not defective or abnormal, and it's not deliberately trying to make your life difficult. It's simply doing the job it has evolved to do, trying to keep you safe and save you from pain.
Okay.
The human mind.
So just to kind of go through a little bit from that video and elaborate on some of the points that are there. I think one of the things that's the foundation of this video is to understand that our brain is generating thoughts because of its survival instinct. So we're not going to get too complicated. I'm by far not a brain expert, but I think to simplify it, to say we have a part of our brain that is focused on survival. We also have part of our brain that's more evolved and more complex than other animals in the world. So our survival brain is not really a whole lot different than other animals. And so from this video, it's talking about, it uses the metaphor of caveman brain, caveman mind, and it's talking about things that our survival brain is wired to pay attention to, literally so it can stay alive. So first of all, just the very fact that it is wired for survival and it's constantly scanning for threat and danger. So our brain, part of our brain is like an alarm system that's constantly on the lookout for something that needs to be responded to. And so with that, it's looking for any threat that may be existing. The thing with the survival brain, though, is it doesn't necessarily differentiate between the nuances of something that's about our physical safety, like, for example, we're about to be attacked by a wild bear, versus a social safety, like that we are being ostracized from the group, or other types of safety, like do I have enough food? What is my shelter like? So all those dangers, all those threats in the survival brain are equally important. There's some little nuances if there's like a physical, like immediate physical danger, but still that survival brain is kind of looking for potential of a threat to safety and existence. And so when it notices potential threats, it activates a survival response. Which we get into more in the fight, flight, freeze video. So the body's response to danger is to engage the fight, flight, freeze response. When that happens, in terms of our thoughts, one of the things that we'll look at is that our thought processes kind of get very simple. They're not able to really process a lot of details. So when our survival brain is activated very strongly, we're not able to problem solve and to think things out as clearly as when our brain is not sensing danger. So when our brain, our survival brain is activated, which is all the time, it's constantly scanning and it's noticing or looking for threats. And it will look for potential for threats as well as threats that are actually happening. And so when this happens, it's really helpful to actually know this is what's going on. So there's not something wrong with us. Our brain is not working wrong when it's doing the what ifs or the replaying or the wondering about how things are going to go. It's trying to say, is there something here I need to be prepared for? The problem comes in our modern world when we don't understand the role of the survival brain and we don't know that that's what's happening and we don't have skills and tools to manage and cope with that survival brain. So this brain is looking for danger. It's trying to simplify and categorize things into good and bad. It compares from one thing to another. It's looking for making sure we fit in socially. It's looking for, do I have enough material things to survive? And it doesn't always fit in our modern world and in the world that we live in today. So we need to be able to learn tools to help manage this part of our brain and to be able to understand its role. So overall, it's important to know that our mind is a thought generating machine. Just like our hearts beat and our lungs breathe, our brain is constantly generating thoughts and scanning for danger. So your mind is a lot like my mind. All of our minds are working in a similar way. But when we don't have the tools to manage or understand, then we can get overwhelmed and it can become problematic. So one of the things we'll look at is the role of our thoughts in our overall mental health. So I just need to skip over screens here now in my views. Just bear with me for 1 second. So we're going to explore how our thoughts interplay with our emotions and our overall mental health. And we'll look at how we can manage these things in a little bit more detail. So when we look at our emotions, which is again often what people identify struggling with when they're identifying their mental health, they might say again things like, I just wish I could stop thinking, or my mind's always racing, and I just, my thoughts are causing me distress, or my thoughts are causing me a lot of pain. Conversely, some people come at it from the emotional perspective and saying like, I'm always upset or I'm anxious, and they describe more of the emotion as what they're struggling with. So we often look at this emotion triangle to help understand what is happening in our mental health, and to kind of look at, it's almost like pieces of a puzzle. If we look at the whole big picture together, we're seeing it as a whole. And when it comes to our mental health, when we look at it as a whole, we may get overwhelmed or may not know how we can intervene. So when we look at the components of emotions and the components of our mental health, we sometimes can see how we can start to make changes and how we can start to improve things. So if we look at this emotion triangle that's on your screen, we have 3 points on the triangle: our thoughts, our actions or behaviors, and our body sensations. We also have on the outside of the triangle what we call a prompting event or trigger. So if we think about our day-to-day life, just going through a regular day in our life, and our survival brain is always going looking for threat and danger, a prompting event can be something that happens around us in our world, or it could be something that happens inside of us. It could actually be the thoughts or the body sensations. So as an example, if I'm stuck in traffic and I'm late for work, a prompting event could be that I'm stuck in traffic and I'm late for work. This can then activate this whole triangle, and I start to have thoughts like, oh my gosh, I'm late for work. I'm going to get in trouble. I don't know why this construction is happening. Why can't they do construction at night? This always happens to me. Why does anything ever work out for me? And we can start to spiral in our thoughts. That's one example. Another person could be stuck in that same traffic and also be late for work and start to think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late for work. That's not so great, but there's nothing I can do about it. Let me turn on some good music and just sit back and relax until I can get through this traffic jam. So, two different thought processes for the same event. When we have our thoughts, then it also activates and is connected to our actions and our body sensations. What's happening for us in our day-to-day experience is that these are all happening apparently simultaneously. So these are not like, gaps of minutes or hours in between these different components. They're very, very quick and very connected. So if I have the thoughts of, oh my gosh, why does this always happen? Why does nothing ever work out for me? I can't stand this traffic. Why are these, people doing construction at this time of the day? Or, I could be thinking like, what's wrong with me? I should have known about this and I should have gotten up earlier in the morning. I'm so stupid. I never do anything right. If I have any of these variations of thoughts, what I'm going to probably doing in my actions and behaviors is tensing up. Well, actually, my body sensations, I'll be tensing up. I may be clenching the steering wheel. I may be leaning forward. I might have tightness in my jaw. I might even start to cry or breathe shallow. So I'm going to have all kinds of reactions in my body. In my behaviors, I may start, maybe limited if I'm stuck in a car, what I can do, but I might start tailgating the car in front of me. I might start trying to weave and see how much traffic there is. I might be distracted and not notice and not pay attention. I might go on my phone. When I get to work, I may be, difficult concentrating. I may be overly apologetic. So my actions might then spill over into, after effects later on. If I'm in the other scenario thinking, gosh, I'm going to be late, I'm just turn on some music. And the opposite, my body I might sit back in my chair. I might like put my hands in my lap when the car is not moving. I might tap my fingers on the steering wheel as I'm listening to the music. I might even dance a little bit. I might sing along, and I might just kind of be fairly relaxed in my body. And my actions again might be to just be sitting there, paying attention around me. And when I get to work, maybe I'm extra diligent in working to catch up on the time that I was a little bit late, because I'm just aware that that happened. So this is a little example, but what happens with this too is that this is not just like a one-time event in our day. as we go through our day, there's always new stimuli, there's always new prompting events happening internally and externally. And so this triangle is like constantly going. And sometimes it can feed on itself. So if we have a bad morning stuck in traffic, it might change our thoughts and our body sensations for the day. So we might be more inclined to filter things in through that lens as the day goes by, which for some people then can lead into not just, that day, it can lead into habits and patterns of interaction of thoughts and actions and body sensations over weeks and months and years. So again, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but just to understand how the thoughts play a role. So when we know this, it's not as easy as just flipping a switch and changing how we think about things. We will look at in this session today ways that we can interact and cope with our thoughts so that we might be able to interject in this triangle to change some of how the triangle unfolds. So we'll look at how we can, notice the impact of our thoughts and then what we can do to change them. So with the examples I've provided, you can start to see how we think, our interpretations of situations impacts how we feel. And so it's often not always the event itself that can trigger the outcome, but it's how we interpret the event. So again, as I said, you can have, everyone who's stuck in that traffic jam can have different reactions depending on how they think and how they process the facts. So one of the things that we look at in terms of changing our thoughts is starting to be able to identify and notice these things for ourselves. So one thing you can do, and you can pause the video here if you like and just try this out a little bit, or as you finish the video, you could try this out over the coming days just to start to pay attention to how this looks in your life. So this is called a thought log, and there's different variations. We'll look at another one later that's has a little bit more steps in it, but this is a beginning way to reflect. So you can start to think about what in your day or your life would be the activating event or trigger, we call it. So the triggering situation. The one I gave was being stuck in traffic. So we start to say, what was happening just before I started to feel, whether it was anxious or scared or sad or mad, what was happening just before that feeling came? What was I doing? Who was I with? Where was I? And when was it? This helps us start to identify things that might be impacting our emotions and our mental health. The reason why this question or this starting point is important is because sometimes we're going through our day and our life a bit on autopilot, where we're not really noticing and we're not paying attention to what's happening. Or sometimes we might notice something, but we might downplay it and not really understand that it had an impact on us. So as we start to reflect on this, we might start to get to know ourselves a little bit better. We might start to notice patterns in triggers, something that might keep happening over and over again. Maybe there's a certain place that we go or a certain person that we interact with. Maybe it's certain types of thoughts themselves that can be your triggering event. So if I wake up in the morning, for example, and I have the thought like, oh, what's going to go wrong today? Nothing's, I got this meeting coming up or I got this thing going on, how bad is it going to go? That can be a triggering or activating event even internally. Or maybe if I have health issues and I wake up and I'm having like strong symptoms, so that might be an activating event. So again, the activating or trigger can be something that's happening outside of you, or it can be something happening inside, a thought or a sensation that you have. So once you start to notice these things, you can start to see patterns that might be there. And then that's also helpful when it comes to making changes. So once you identify the activating event, you can then start to think about what are your beliefs. So what are the thoughts and the images that you had? What was going through your mind at that time? Now, this might be a little bit hard for some people. So in a little bit, I'm going to actually do an activity with you that can help you with identifying what are your thoughts that you're having, and also what are the meaning and the interpretations that you have. So when we have the thought, so for example, I'll go back to like I'm stuck in traffic and I'm going to be late for work. If I start to think, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid, like why didn't I get up earlier? I knew this traffic was going to happen. I knew that there was construction going on today. I keep on making these dumb mistakes, and I start to go on a big list of, how I make all kinds of mistakes in my life. That's the meaning and the interpretations. I'm making this mean that I'm a bad person. I'm not smart. I always mess things up. I never do anything right. The worst thing that would happen, I'm maybe thinking I'm going to get fired. I'm not going to be able to keep this job. And then I can go into even more of like a worst case scenario, like, that if I don't keep this job, then how am I going to pay for my rent? If I can't pay for my rent, I'm going to be homeless. So sometimes we actually just have like awareness of like a little bit of a beginning of a thought, and we don't even realize the whole movie that we're playing out in our mind with that one thought. So again, by writing about your beliefs and your interpretations, it helps you to kind of become more aware of where your mind's going, even when you're not fully processing it. Then the final thing you write about in this ABC thought log is the consequences of your thoughts. So when I think this thought, what happens? What are the emotions that I feel? What are the sensations that I have in my body? And then what do I do in my actions? And also what did I feel like doing? Because sometimes I don't necessarily do it every single time, but we might feel like it. So I might say, like, oh, I just want to go home and curl up in bed and pull the blankets over my head and just not deal with the day. I might still go to work and I might still be late, but I might be like dragging myself through it the whole day, like feeling like I just want to go home. I just want to get away from things. This is too much to handle. So you write down the consequences of the thought. And then over time, again, as we'll look at, if we can start to use skills and tools to identify and change our relationship with our thoughts, sometimes we will interrupt the cycle and we'll have different consequences that we start to feel and notice. So what we're going to look at now is if we can't stop thinking, if our brain is going to be constantly generating thoughts, that's what our brain does. And we know that our brain is constantly looking for threat and danger. What are our options then? What can we do to manage these thoughts? So the first thing we need to do, going back to that thought log, is that we need to become more aware of what we're thinking. Now, for some of you watching this video, this might seem like, not the place to start. There's two potential situations here. Some people are very, very hyper aware of their thoughts, and they are really paying attention to, and I'll use the phrase, we're buying our thoughts. We're kind of caught up in our thoughts, and we're very aware of what we're thinking. Other people, like I explained and acknowledged a minute ago, are not really aware of their thoughts, or we're only aware of them to a certain degree and not to the full degree. Like, what are the what's the play out? What's the movie that gets played as we visualize or we hear these thoughts? So we first need to become aware of our thinking, and we're going to look at two different approaches, two different therapeutic approaches in managing our thoughts. One is from an approach called ACT, which stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And the other approach is probably known by more people, called CBT, Cognitive and Behavioral Therapy. So we're going to touch on both approaches. There's some overlap between both, but there are also some differences too. So we'll give you an overview of these different things. And so with this too, I'm going to acknowledge that this is an overview. There's going to be some concrete tools that you can take away and practice. But depending on how much this is a struggle for you, or the life experiences or the impacts that you've experienced, you may need some more support to help you work through these things. So just kind of do your best with what we have here. And for some of you, this might be sufficient and adequate to help you change some of your coping with your thoughts. And for others of you, it might be like an introduction and an awareness, like, oh, I want to do some more work here and I need a little bit of support. So either outcome is not bad. They're both valid outcomes. So we're going to look at the concept of thought diffusion, which is from the ACT perspective. And so when we are looking at thought diffusion, we're going to be looking at how do we observe our thoughts. Observing our thoughts is a big piece or a foundational piece of coping with our thoughts through the ACT perspective. And so on your screen, there's a picture of two people with bodies of water. So this is a little bit of an analogy for the differences in how we can respond to our thoughts. The first picture on the left is a person who's in a river. The river is rushing with water. The water is very fast and it's up to the person's weight, and they have poles that they're using to try to manage. This is an analogy for when we are in our thoughts, when we are immersed in our thoughts and we are not separate from our thoughts. The second image on the right is a person, and so the river is again very fast and very full. The river is racing very quickly. If that person fell in the river, they'd be in danger of being swept along and possibly being in danger with their life. But they are standing back on the bank of the river. So whether that river is quiet and peaceful or it's a raging torrent like it is in this one, the person's able to be back safely on the bank of the river looking at the river. So the river is a metaphor for our thoughts, or an analogy for our thoughts. Sometimes our thoughts are quieter and they're not really any big deal. And other times they are very, very fast and they're very overwhelming. And we might literally feel like we're drowning in our thoughts. So when we look at diffusion, thought diffusion, it's about being able to step back and observe our thoughts rather than being in them. I'm going to add another metaphor here now, so hopefully it will make sense. So another thing we can think about, just to explain like the difference of being in our thoughts and not being able to see the difference, is if you think about glasses. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, I know I have, where I've had on my sunglasses, it's been a sunny day out, and I might forget that I have them on my head, and I might go into a store and think, oh gosh, it's really dark here. Or the opposite, I do wear glasses for reading now, and so sometimes I'll have them on, and I forget that I had them on, and I go and put on another pair over my first pair. So what that means, I was like that the glasses, like you forget that the glasses are on, and it affects your vision and it skews how you see things. And so when we're in our thoughts, it's like wearing a lens. It's like how we see the world. So I'll go back to the example. If I have a lens of, seeing myself as defective or to blame for things, I can be wearing the lens of like, I'm not good enough, or I always mess things up. That might be such an automatic way for me to see myself and see the world, that's like an automatic habitual thing of every time I experience something, that is part of how I see it. Maybe I don't ever think about like what was other people's, contribution here, or what are other factors. I just automatically think this is my fault. I always mess things up. There's something wrong with me. So if I believe that thought, if I'm in that thought and I don't even know that that's happening, I'm not even aware that there's a thought. It's just to me like an almost a fact. It's just like how things are. I always mess things up. Things never work out for me. There's something wrong with me. That's how I see things automatically. So then when we have that thought like that, we're in the river, we're in the thought. We don't even know that we're in it. Whereas if we can step back and observe that I'm having the thought that, I always mess things up, then there's a separation that happens. I'm going to go back to a video. I skipped over the slide, but I'm going to go back to it now to just illustrate. There's a video that kind of talks about what this can look like, and just talks through a little scenario of about our thoughts. So just give me 1 second when I go back in the slides. Okay, it might not be coming up there. It might be in another spot. Okay, so we'll move along and we'll move into how we can observe our thoughts. So I said that when we looked at the ABC sheet, one of the things that might be helpful is how do we get to start to learn to observe our thoughts? One of the ways that we can start to become more aware of our thoughts, and not just the initial thought that we have, but also like that, what is the meaning? What is the interpretation? What's the fear that we have? What is the worst outcome? Is to do what's called stream of consciousness writing. So I'm going to explain what this is, and then this will be a spot in the video where I'm going to encourage you to pause and practice this writing just to see what it feels like for you. So I'm going to encourage you to get a piece of paper and pencil. And when you do stream of consciousness writing, it's not the same as maybe traditional journaling where we're writing about our day or we're writing about something that happens and how we feel about it. Stream of consciousness writing is a specific type of writing where we're taking what's in our head, anything that goes through our mind, and we're putting it on paper. Some people have kind of used the description like it's almost like a trash box or a garbage bin for our thoughts. So because we want to write out everything that comes in our mind, we don't want to censor anything. So we don't want to worry about spelling. We don't want to worry about punctuation. We don't want to worry about, like, how will someone else think if they see this, or what will they think of me if they read this? Because when we do stream of consciousness writing, it's not really writing that you actually keep. There's no need to keep it. So you can do something, you can burn it, you can rip it up, you can do whatever, but you don't keep this to go back and reread. I kind of think about it like if you were to have a conversation with someone you feel really close with, like you're not recording the conversation to play it back later. So this stream of consciousness writing is kind of like having a conversation with yourself. So you're writing out to yourself like all of your thoughts, your deepest fears, your kind of most worrying things that go through your mind, or your most scary or your most sad or whatever it might be. You're writing it out on paper. It's often really helpful to do when you're struggling with an emotion already. So if you sit and do it when there's nothing really going on, it may not be overly beneficial. It's not going to be harmful, but it's not probably going to be anything significantly beneficial. But it's helpful, like when you're noticing that you're struggling with an emotion or struggling with a situation, to take out that paper and do it. When you write, you ideally write continuously. It could be for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe even up to a half an hour, but you're writing continuously till you feel like you've gotten to the end of what you need to figure out or what you think about something. In that time, if you get stuck and you're not sure, you can just write, I'm stuck and I'm not sure what else to write. You literally write what goes into your mind, what goes through your mind. You can say, I don't know what's going on here, or I don't know what else to think, or I don't know what else. And you can ask yourself questions like, what does this mean to me? Or what am I afraid of here? And you can write your answers. So again, you're trying to keep your conversation going with yourself until you feel like you've gotten to understand how are you thinking about a situation or something that's going on. So I'm just thinking now, is there anything else I want to say about this before I ask you to try it out? I think that's the main points. So if you have something now that you're struggling with, or that you've been recently struggling with, or an emotion that's been causing you trouble, or a situation that's kind of going on in your life, it would be a great time to pause the video here now and just do that writing for a little bit of time. It could be, again, some short time. It could be, a little bit longer. So if you don't have like the full amount of time to give it right now, definitely come back and do this shortly after. But I think it'd be better if you would be willing to give it a try now. And even if that means that this is where you stop the video for today and come back to some more parts of it, later today or on another day. Okay, so I'm going to hope that you were able to practice that and that you found some insight into what that process is like. And again, as a reminder, you can tear that paper up, you can burn it, you can just throw it in the trash. And even as you do that, you can imagine, that you're releasing some of that as you do it. So continuing on with how to become more aware of our thoughts and how to practice thought diffusion as we become aware of them. Another tool that's part of ACT is to visualize our thoughts. So one of the most common ways that we can visualize, or one of the ones that's used most often, is called leaves on a stream. So it kind of fits in back with that metaphor again of the thoughts being like a river. And that, sometimes the river is like a raging, fast body of water. Other times it's peaceful and calm. But if we think about our thoughts and we notice our thoughts, we can then visualize placing them on a leaf. I'll just say it in advance. For some people, this one is really, really wonderful, and they love it, and it's their go-to strategy. Other people may say, like, I'm not really able to visualize things. It doesn't really work for me. So I just want to put that out there that either way is okay, because we have lots of different options. But this is really, really helpful for many people. And there's some people who this is not their favorite tool. So that's okay. And that's why we add lots of tools into our toolbox for our mental health, because the more we have, the more we're going to have some that are beneficial. So I'm going to play a video now that's going to just guide you through using leaves on a stream as an activity that you can do to help you with noticing your thoughts.
It can sometimes feel that our thoughts get the better of us. Instead of trying to control thoughts, it can be useful to take a step back. One way to do this is to try a visualization technique called leaves on a stream. To begin, find a comfortable position and picture a stream. As your mind settles in, tune into the flow of the stream. Is it fast or slow? Take a few moments and watch the stream go by. Envision leaves now floating on the surface. Watch them go by. Now, imagine placing a thought on a leaf and watch it go by. As each thought comes up, place it on a leaf and let it go by. Right now, you may have thoughts like, I have so much to do, or this is uncomfortable. Place that thought on a leaf too, and watch it go by. Allow the stream to flow at its own pace. Some leaves go by quickly. Some get stuck or take their time. There's no need to force them along. Allow them to come and go as they are. When you find yourself away from the stream, or caught on a leaf heading down the stream, invite yourself to return. Continue on for as long as you'd like, noticing thoughts and placing them on the leaf. And pay attention to how it feels to watch your thoughts go by instead of following them down the stream.
Okay, so I like that, have a little silence at the end. You can continue and pause the video if you want to just continue that activity for a little bit longer. So those two techniques of stream of consciousness writing and observing your thoughts, placing it on an object, are two ways we can start to become more aware and start to step back and observe our thoughts. I was going to show a video earlier and the slide wasn't in the right order, so the video's here now. So I'm going to show another video, which is again going to be talking about the ACT perspective of cognitive fusion and diffusion, which is again about being able to notice our thoughts and change our relationship with it. Because again, one of the things that causes us struggle in our mental health is when we're in those thoughts, immersed in those thoughts, and not even knowing that that's what's happening. And then we get pulled into the associated physical sensations in our body and the actions that go along with the thoughts without even having awareness of the connection or what's happening. So this video is going to explain a little bit more about the concept of cognitive fusion and diffusion and the role of our thoughts. And we'll continue with looking at the next step of things, which is how do we start to, or how do we continue actually to step back and observe. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be a commercial at this one in the beginning. So I'll skip it as quickly as possible.
Today. So first, to understand cognitive diffusion, we need to understand what is cognitive fusion. Your brain is a word machine. It says stuff and it thinks stuff all the time. When you look through the lens of your thoughts, this is called cognitive fusion. It's the problem of being stuck to your thoughts. Cognitive fusion is buying into every thought that passes through your mind. It's when you think something, you don't even notice it, you just believe it. In this episode, we're going to talk about recognizing all of our thoughts and separating ourselves from them, and then selectively choosing which thoughts or beliefs you want to act on or buy, as we say, instead of letting random subconscious thoughts dictate your mood, your choices, and your ultimate happiness. So let me start with a story to illustrate cognitive fusion and cognitive diffusion. So once I was working with a young man who had a lot of social anxiety. We'll call him Miguel. And he had a good group of friends, but every time he hung out with them, he would start to feel really anxious. And then when he was at a party, he would make some joke or say something, and then he would start to worry. He would think, oh, did I say the wrong thing? Did I hurt her feelings? Or if, for example, one group of friends split off into the pool and another invited him to the game room, he would panic a little bit, feeling like terrified because he didn't know which group to go with. And then he'd start thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm getting anxious again. I'm such a loser. And then he'd think, oh, don't think that way. What's the matter with you? Don't feel anxious. Why do you always do this? And then he would just start going back and forth in his head, right? Fighting his negative thoughts and trying not to feel anxious. And if he couldn't get his anxious thoughts to go away, he'd feel uncomfortable and he'd leave the party early. Now, in this example, Miguel was fused with his thoughts in two ways. The first way was that when he was trying to hang out with his friends, he got all wrapped up in trying to make his thoughts go away. He was focusing all his energy on fighting his thoughts, and that kept him stuck or fused to them instead of putting his energy into having a good time. The second way that he got fused with his thoughts is that he had an unwritten rule that he didn't even know about. He didn't notice he was thinking it, and it colored everything he did. Let me show you. So when I asked Miguel why he would get anxious, he said, well, I always worry that I might say something wrong or that I might offend someone or hurt someone's feelings. And when I asked, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I always overthink everything I say. After hanging out, I always worry that something I said might have bothered someone or that a joke I made might have hurt someone's feelings. And I just hate dealing with all the drama. So I said, what drama? He said, well, if a couple of my friends invite me to do something with them, but they don't invite my other friend, and then my other friend invites me to do something that same night, how do I say no to the other friend without making them feel bad? So I asked a follow-up question. So I said, they aren't being dramatic, you're just worrying. And he's like, yeah. I said, well, what are you most afraid of? And he said that I might make someone feel bad by saying no. So at that point, I realized what was going on. And I said, it sounds like you have a rule in your head that you're never allowed to make anyone feel bad. So he thought for a second. He said, I guess so. Never noticed that I had that rule. but now that you say that, I think you're right. And then he was able to tell me some examples. He said, once I had a girlfriend who I wanted to break up with, but I didn't for like a year because I didn't want to make her feel bad. And I was like, yes, that is a good example. And he gave me another one. He said, if the food is terrible or it's cooked wrong at the restaurant and the waiter asks, how's the food? He always says, great, even if it's a lie. So this young man, Miguel, he didn't realize he was thinking this rule, right? I can never make anyone feel bad. And this rule that he didn't even know he had was making him really anxious. He had bought that thought. He believed it without even noticing that he was thinking that way. So in Miguel's case, he was stuck to his thoughts. It was keeping him from being present with his friends. When we buy our thoughts, when we believe everything we think, it makes it hard for us to change. So the antidote to this is learning to notice your thoughts without buying them. You learn to look at your thoughts instead of looking through your thoughts. And you notice yourself as the thinker, the place where these thoughts happen. When Miguel noticed his unwritten rule, he could see how impossible it was, how it was keeping him from having good relationships. And when he was able to notice that rule, it was like, before he noticed the rule, it was like, oh my gosh, I have to make everyone feel good or I'm a bad person. And then he looks at that rule and he's like, oh, that's a thought. That's a rule I have. And he's like, that's not very helpful. He said, and then he was able to replace it with something more helpful. So he noticed that thought and he's like, you know what, instead of that rule, I'd like to replace it with this. I can't control how others feel, but I value being kind and assertive. So he could see both of these thoughts and he could choose which one was most helpful for him. And this helped him feel less anxiety at parties and helped him focus his energy on being present and having a good time and being kind to people. Now, this idea of cognitive diffusion is kind of a difficult concept to explain, but it's easier to demonstrate. So you've got to experience it to understand it. So I'm going to give you about 4 exercises that you can try to get a feeling for what it feels like to look at your thoughts instead of.
Okay, so we're going to do some of those exercises in our own way in the rest of this video too to help you. Oops. To help us be able to do that. There's some things that she talks about in the video that I want to highlight. And so again, she's talking about how we can notice our thoughts. And in the act of noticing, we then can step back from our thoughts and see ourselves as separate. So we are not the thought, we are the thinker of the thought, if that distinction makes sense to people. So being able to step back and notice a thought is automatically diffusing or making us be unstuck and allowing us to be separate from the thought. So we're back on the bank of the river just by noticing. It's when we automatically, habitually think things without any awareness and we believe them without any consideration that we are fused with the thought and we don't understand the ability to have a different relationship with it. So we all do this. This is not, again, something that some people do or some people don't do. This is something we all do because it's how our survival brain has worked. And a lot of times we haven't learned, we haven't had the opportunity to be taught how to step back and have a different relationship with our thoughts. So it is the automatic believing of thoughts and the lack of awareness of thoughts that is more of the place where the struggle comes from than the actual thoughts themselves. Any type of thought that you can identify you've struggled with or you've had, most likely other people have had too. And so when we think again that there's something wrong, like why would I have that thought? That's not a normal thought, or that's not a right way to think, or these things. Those are more thoughts that we're having that then we believe, and then we go into the spiral of the consequences of those thoughts. So we're going to practice learning how to, so when you do the activities like leaves on a stream or stream of consciousness, or you're going through your day and you're noticing something going on inside, it doesn't, usually something painful is what activates us to want to reflect on these things. When things are going well or they're kind of neutral, it's not as problematic. We can still practice there though too. But most often the places to practice are where we're having some sense of struggle or some emotional pain of some sort. So when you are in your day and when you are in your experiences, and you stop to say, what am I thinking right now? How am I interpreting the situation? What's happening for me in my mind? And you start to notice what you're thinking, you can start to use some of these strategies here on the slide. So I'm going to get you to practice this first couple here as we go through. So if there is a thought that you know you have already that is problematic, like, so for example, if you have a lot of anxious thoughts, if there's a particular thing you worry about a lot, you can pick one of those. If you have a lot of self-critical thoughts, you can try to identify a common criticism that you say to yourself. If there's something you think about other people or other situations, and you think that a lot. So it could be anything that you know is a thought that you might have. So I want you to first have that thought in your mind. So I'm going to use the example, which is a common one in mental health, like that a lot of people have when they struggle, is that there's something wrong with me. So if I notice I have that thought, there's something wrong with me, and that's one that I, regularly go to in my struggles, in my coping, and my thought patterns. I'm just going to notice, like, what does it feel like when I say that? When I have that thought and I'm believing that thought, there's something wrong with me. So you use your thought that you've identified and just kind of think about, like, when you say that to yourself normally, how do you feel? What happens in your body when you think that thought? I'm just going to give you a moment to think about that and just feel it in this moment. So now I want you to stop, and I want you to try putting in front of it, I'm having the thought that. So my example is, I'm having the thought that there's something wrong with me, that there's something like inherently wrong, or that I'm not good enough. I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. So you use that phrase in front of the thought you're practicing with. I'm having the thought that, and whatever it is. And just say that a few times and notice how that feels in your body, how that feels for you to say it in that way. And then the next step is we add another little bit on and say, I notice I'm having the thought that. So I notice I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. I'm noticing that I'm having that thought in this moment. Just try that one out and see how that feels. Just take a little moment before we move on to the next ones, and just like think about your typical day, and how your thoughts typically are going and feeling in your head as you go through your day, and just think about what would it be like if you were able to catch some of those thoughts and replace it, or to not replace it, but to kind of catch them and put in place for them to say, I notice I'm thinking this. I notice this thought's in my mind right now. Do you think that that would make any difference in your relationship with the thought? What it often does for people is it takes us out of survival brain, where the thoughts are habitual and automatic, into our more complex, evolved human awareness, to be able to see that our brain is just generating thoughts. So usually it takes away some of the emotional intensity that can come if we don't have that ability to notice the thought is there and we're just believing the thought that's there. The next strategy we can use going from there, once we start to have the ability to notice and notice our thoughts, is to name them. So going back to my example, I might name the thoughts of, like, I'm not good enough as my not good enough voice. I could give it a name, like there's my negative Nelly. I could say there's my downer voice, or there's my just label it my critical voice or whatever it might be. So you can get like a little bit creative, or you might even say a little bit silly and give them like actual names. Like there's, Negative Nelly or Debbie Downer, or there's like, again, my not good enough voice. But you're labeling. So when you notice that there's patterns or habits of thinking, sometimes it's helpful to give them a name or a label, because you can do a shortcut then of like saying, oh, there it is again. Like there's my not good enough voice. And you almost can then have a new pattern, a new pathway where you don't have to struggle with the thought every single time, because you develop new relationship with that thought where it's just a thought and you don't have to buy it. So you can think about what you could like, it's kind of like summarizing. So if we usually have like different categories of patterns. So I can have my self-critical pattern, I can have my worry pattern, I can have my what if pattern, I can have my my pattern where my victim pattern where I've been hurt, and I can have all these different awarenesses of all these different parts of my thoughts. And so when I see them in action, I can say, oh, there that is again. And it's not that we are dismissing anything, but what we're doing is knowing that there's these routines of thinking. So this is a really important piece of understanding our thoughts, which can help us, is that we recognize that a lot of the things that we think are the same, they're just repetitions and variations of the same patterns of thought. And for a lot of us, our thought patterns start in our earlier life, whether from our life experiences that we have. And when we go through those life experiences in childhood or early years, we're trying to make sense of often complex or difficult things through a child's mind or a young person's mind. And so how we make sense of things is often like through those lenses of self-criticism or black and white thinking, things like that. Like we might say the world's a bad place, or you can't trust people, or again, I'm not good enough, or don't expect good things. Like this is how we can look at things through our child or younger adult simplicity of our understanding. So we develop some of these thought patterns in our earlier life or from like significant life events. And the other place we get some of our thought patterns is just by observing the people around us. So if we have people around us who have good ways of managing their thoughts, and they have like more positive or optimistic thought patterns, we might learn those things. But if we are around people who are struggling with their mental health, or maybe haven't learned coping mechanisms for their thoughts, we may have learned unhealthy ways of thinking. So when we can notice these patterns and see these repeating over time, again, we can label them so that we can almost have a shortcut or a category of there's that group of thoughts that, lead me down this path. And there's those group of thoughts that lead me down this one. And so we can catch it and say, oh, I notice I'm having these not good enough thoughts again. So it's kind of combining the labeling and the noticing at the same time. The next one on the slide is saying we can thank our mind. Now, this might sound like a strange thing to do. Like, why in the world would we thank our mind for all these difficult and painful thoughts? But if we go back to recognizing that a lot of this comes from our survival brain, and our survival brain does have a role and it does keep us alive, we can just acknowledge it. Thank you, brain, for doing that, or thank you, brain, for pointing it out, or thank you, mind. And then we can know that it has its place and we don't have to get stuck in it. So we're saying, yes, I see that worry, but that's not actually valid right now. So let me redirect my focus and my energy to what I am doing right now that is more helpful and effective. We've already talked about placing thoughts on an object like a leaf to notice them, but you also can do other things like writing a thought, like on a, not even so much the stream of consciousness writing where it's longer, but like you can write a thought like, that I'll stick with the example I've been using, like the I'm not good enough thought. And you could write that on a piece of paper, for example, and you could symbolically like let that go in a river physically, like not just mentally, but physically, or you could burn it. You could write a thought on a rock, on a, you know, something you could carry around, and like you can like notice that rock and see like, is that thought present in my life today? So sometimes the placing thoughts on an object, it's to kind of notice it and watch it go by so we don't hold on to it. But sometimes we can also write it on an object so we can remember to be trying to catch it. So it's two different purposes for the same type of activity. And the final one also might seem like a little bit strange, like how in the world would that be helpful, or why would we do that? But the singing our thoughts or saying them in silly voices is just another strategy to help us to realize that thoughts are just strings of words, and the words only have the meaning that we give to them. So if I, you know, have a thought like, you know, oh, it's going to be a bad day, and I start to sing that thought and, you know, kind of sing it in different words or different tones, then I'm just realizing that's just words that I'm just, you know, giving some weight and meaning to. And I can also take that back. I don't need to invest that energy into making those thoughts mean something important when they're just my brain doing what it does, you know, kind of anticipating worries, anticipating things that it might need to address, but that's not actually happening right now. So these are called diffusion strategies again, because they help us step back, become the observer, and not attached or fused to the thoughts that we have. I also want to just go into the video again for one more thing when she talks about noticing the rules. So she talked about Miguel, and so he had the thought like, you know, I don't want to upset somebody. And so she was able to, in the questioning of him, help him identify he has this rule that it's not, he shouldn't like have anybody be mad at him, or he shouldn't hurt anybody else. So when you do the stream of consciousness writing, or when you are noticing your thoughts, it is really helpful if you do start to notice and you can start to ask yourself, like, what is, so one of the ways you can get to this is like to keep asking yourself, and what does that mean? And what does that mean? And what does that mean? Until you feel like you get to the deeper issue that's happening. So it might not always work. And so if it doesn't, like, again, don't stress or don't like put pressure on yourself. Sometimes it just might take some time for these things to become known. And not every single time is there going to be a deeper meaning. Sometimes it just could be we have a worry thought, or some type of thought that we have. But if we can identify, another phrase we use for these is called our core beliefs. And so again, the example I've been using for illustrative purposes, you know, like the belief, for example, that I'm not good enough. That sometimes is a core belief for people. It's like, again, that lens that they wear. And so then that, you know, kind of manifests in different specific thoughts dependent on the situation. Like, where do I think I'm not good enough right now in this moment? So if I'm, you know, doing this presentation today and I have the core belief that I'm not good enough, maybe I'm having thoughts like as I'm going through, or before I do it, or after I did it, about specifically how I wasn't good enough in this situation. So it's the same belief, but it just has different forms depending on how it shows up in a specific moment in your life. So again, when you identify the core beliefs, you can just like, that can be one of your labeling techniques. Say like, oh, there's that I'm not good enough belief again. So this is the ACT approach. So by observing our thoughts and naming them, we're stepping back. And so then that in and of itself can change our relationship with our thoughts, because we're not being pulled into them all the time. We're not believing our thoughts. Everything we think is not a truth. Most of what we think, actually, this is an important thing to be aware of when we're looking at thoughts, most of what we think is not actually true. Most of what we think is not a fact. Most of what we think is more of an interpretation, an assumption, a conclusion, a categorization, a summary. It is not actually facts. So when we look at our thoughts, we can, and we step back, we can sometimes better see the thought as just a thought. So when we do that, sometimes that's all we need to do. Sometimes like that in and of itself will instantly reduce the activation. That triangle we looked at earlier, we can say, oh, that's a thought. And then it the rest of the triangle doesn't unfold because we're not believing and buying the thought. In CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, there's also some other approaches to thoughts, which are more about challenging and replacing. Now, in the video we just watched, and she used a scenario of Miguel. Miguel did work to replace his core belief to say, like, I'm not only always able to, make everybody happy. Sometimes people are going to be upset with me, but I'm going to do my best to be a good person and treat people kindly and respectfully. So that was his new thought. So he was able to identify the core belief or the rule he had, and he was able to replace it. The difference is a little bit of the challenging piece. So sometimes the challenging piece for some people actually is not done effectively. So what happens is they end up getting into more of an argument in their mind with things. So you might relate to this, like if you have a thought and you try to like, no, don't think like that, or that's not right, or don't be so stupid. And then you kind of are, arguing against your own self, and you're not really believing your new thought. So instead of just like saying like, that's the thought, we get into like trying to argue it. For sometimes some people that can work, and other times it actually creates this vicious cycle where we're not believing ourselves and we're trying to change it. But we will look at some of these challenging and replacing tools, and we'll also look at some things, some tools that can fall into this category. Specifically, we're going to look at affirmations and the practice of gratitude. So these are the next things we're going to look at in terms of how we can change our thoughts. So when we are doing the CBT approach, and we're wanting to challenge our thoughts, we can do that with a little bit of questioning. So trying to like, it's tied again to the act of recognizing that not everything we think is true. With ACT, it's just that's kind of where it stops. We know that what we're thinking is not true. Whereas in CBT, we're doing some investigation to prove that it's not true and to kind of present the opposite scenario or a different scenario. So when we're questioning, is this true? We can say, is there substantial evidence for my thought? Or is there evidence opposite to my thought? Am I interpreting a situation without all the evidence? We can also ask, what would a friend think about this situation? We can ask ourselves, if I was to look at this situation in a different way, from a positive perspective, do I see anything differently? And we can also ask ourselves, like, will this matter a year from now or about 5 years from now? So go back to the scenario I used earlier in the session, like that we're stuck in traffic and we're going to be late for work. And I start to think, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. I should have gotten up earlier. My boss is going to be mad at me. My whole day is ruined. Why does this always happen to me? And I have like this whole stream of thoughts. So first of all, within there's more than one thought. So it'd be helpful to identify the different types of thoughts that are in there. Some of them are self-critical thoughts. Some of them are worst case scenario thoughts. Some of them are, like thoughts like nothing ever works out for me or the world's a bad place. So there might be some different categories that we want to try to identify. For each one, then we can say, is there evidence for my thought? So if I say like, oh, I'm so stupid, I should have gotten up earlier. I always make mistakes like this. I'm never do things right. When we say, is there substantial evidence for this thought? Sometimes what happens is we start to look at all the other perceived failures and mistakes. But what we're doing is a mental filter for the next part of like things that we have done well and things that we have succeeded at. All of us make mistakes in life. All of us are far from perfect. So we're going to be able to find evidence for like, that I make mistakes, of course. But when we make it into like, I'm unworthy or I am defective or I am flawed as a human being, that's where the evidence doesn't stack up. And so we need to be able to account for the evidence to the opposite of like where we are worthy, where we have been able to succeed. And so we need to kind of look at both of those areas. Am I attempting to interpret this situation without all the evidence? So like making assumptions like around what's going to happen at work or, labeling the government or construction workers or whatever, like, as bad, like then we're not maybe factoring in all of the complexity of a situation. And the question of what would a friend think about the situation. So if I say, well, if my friend was stuck in this traffic, like what would they do? Or if they knew that I was stuck in this traffic, like what would they tell me to do? So that can help us access different perspectives, different ways of thinking about things. Because again, what happens is we're often very habitual. We have our automatic go-to ways of interpreting. And so then that doesn't always allow us to actually step back and see other ways of looking at a situation. And which is what the last two questions are also getting at, like how we can step back and see things from a little bit of a different lens. So back to this ABC model, we had this earlier in the columns. So we already looked at the activating event, the beliefs, and the consequences. Now when we're looking at the the CBT perspective and looking at how we can challenge and replace, we add in the D and the E, which is challenging our beliefs to create new consequences. And then what are the effective new beliefs that we want to have? So it's just, again, kind of elaborating on how we can challenge. I'm going to go ahead to, oh, no, sorry, I'm going to go back to this one. So this is an example. This applies to both the ACT and the CBT approaches. These are what are called unhelpful thinking habits. Sometimes we also call these cognitive distortions. So cognitive meaning how we think, and distortions meaning that they're not accurate ways of seeing things. These unhelpful thinking habits are things that we all do. So again, this is not something that only some people do. My mind does these unhelpful thinking habits, and most likely your mind does too. So when you look at all of these examples of thinking habits, again, by noting these, it can help you be able to observe them more. And when you observe and catch them, you can also use this awareness to do the labeling, to say, oh, this is a mental filter, or I'm mind reading right now, or I'm doing my critical self. And so that can be the labeling piece. This other second column here is kind of tying into the CBT part about, how you can then challenge it. So mental filter is when we filter in this. Again, the picture here is wearing glasses, which is kind of, with our theme today. So when we're filtering things in mentally, it means that we're also discarding other things. So the question is, am I only noticing the bad stuff? Am I filtering out the positives? Am I wearing gloomy specs, or what would be more realistic? So that would be how we can challenge. But if we notice that we're doing a mental filter and filtering out things that don't support our views, we can purposely start to look for the opposite. So I'm going to keep going with my couple of examples just for consistency. If I had the thought that I'm not good enough, and I recognize, okay, Jackie, you have this thought that you're not good enough, you can then use the awareness of that mental filter to say, I want to be more mindful and aware when I do things that I'm proud of. I want to be able to notice when I do things right. So you can use the mental filter intentionally to kind of allow yourself to filter in more broadly. Mind reading is something we all do when we're trying to make assumptions about other people or other things. So if I say, oh, that person doesn't care about me, or that person's so selfish, or the opposite, like, oh my gosh, that person's amazing and they do everything right. We're mind reading and making assumptions about another person's intentions or their who they are. So this is really, really important in relationships or in situations like when we're trying to understand something, and we might be combining it with the mental filter of filtering out good things. Anytime we're making assumptions about something else about other people, it's a cognitive distortion. And so we can notice, like, oh, I notice I'm having the thought that this person doesn't care about me, that I'm mind reading their motivations or their thoughts. Predicting the worst, or predictions overall, are unhelpful thinking habits. So when we notice that we're doing what ifs, or we're making assumptions about how things are going to go, we can recognize that that's happening and be able to say, I notice I'm doing this. Compare and despair is when we're looking at, comparing ourselves to other people. Social media has a huge impact on this one, because, we're often looking at other people's presentation on social media, and comparing it to what our life is. So then it often leads to like thoughts about like, again, that I'm, what's wrong with me? Why is my life not like that? Or I wish I had that too. So being able to catch when we're doing that. Critical self, I think I've talked about enough in the examples, but like we all have that critical self that's putting ourselves down and seeing the worst of ourselves. The shoulds and the musts. So anytime we're saying I should or I shouldn't, or you should or you shouldn't, or I have to or I must, it's a cognitive distortion that we want to catch. What's more helpful to say when we catch that is like, I notice I'm saying I should do this, is like to say, do I want to do this? Or I choose to do this. Because when we're using shoulds, it kind of ties into the next one, we're doing judgments of ourselves or others. We're evaluating ourselves or other people or situations. Emotional reasoning is when we're using our emotions to assume the truth. So just because I feel like I did something stupid, then that means I'm a stupid person. That's using my emotions as a fact. So kind of like with our thoughts as facts. So we want to be able to say, like, I notice I'm having a feeling, I'm feeling stupid and I'm thinking stupid, but that's just a thought. So a lot of times when we're feeling intense emotions, so another example would be like if I'm feeling anxious, because I'm feeling anxious, that must mean that there's something I need to be anxious about, that this is an anxiety provoking situation. Anxiety is very much tied to our thoughts. So if we notice that we're feeling anxious, we can then be able to say, this doesn't necessarily mean it's a truth about the situation. Mountains out of molehills is when we are exaggerating or adding to the sense of threat and danger. So if I'm going back to like my caught in traffic, if I'm caught in traffic and I'm saying like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired, maybe the boss might say to me like, Jackie, you got to like make more effort to get on time. That's not so great, but it doesn't mean I'm getting fired. So when we have a difficult situation or something we're dealing with, we don't have to add to it and make it bigger than it is. We can focus on the facts of what is happening, even if it's not so great, and deal with the facts of that reality. Catastrophizing is exactly what it sounds like. It's worst case scenario, always looking at the worst thing that can happen. This might sound like it's an obvious one that we would, be able to catch no trouble. But again, sometimes these things are quite sneaky and they're automatic, and we don't always notice the difference between the fact and the thought. So if I'm dealing with something difficult and I'm gone to the worst case scenario, to me, that might be like, well, that's obviously what's going to happen. But if we can stop and like recognize the thought that's there and separate it out from the fact, it can help us notice when we're catastrophizing. Black and white thinking, or also it's called all or nothing thinking, is not recognizing that there's lots of shades of gray in between. So when we say something, whenever we use the word like always and never, we're usually doing black and white thinking. And lots of times memories are unhelpful thinking habits. It doesn't mean that we cannot remember the past. Sometimes it's helpful and important to think about the past if there's learning that we need to get from the past, or if we want to remember past events, and especially if it's positive memories. But sometimes when we go into just mindlessly reliving the past, it's really unhelpful. And again, back to our survival brain doesn't always recognize the difference between like thinking about something or it actually happening now. So if I'm lost in reliving a traumatic memory from the past, my survival brain is activated as if that's happening again. We're literally reliving the experience. So when we get into doing that, it's something that would be helpful to notice again and be able to catch, and with mindfulness, to bring ourselves into the present moment and to focus our thoughts and our attention where we want it to be in this present moment. Okay, so now we're going to move into some specific things that we can do to change some of our thinking patterns. So again, just to kind of recap where we are right now, we've looked at the reason why we have so many painful thoughts. It's not because there's something wrong with us or our brain is not working properly. We have a lot of painful stressful, struggling thoughts because our survival brain is always looking for potential threat and danger. So our brain is constantly generating thoughts. The problems, simply put, this is a bit of a simplification, our problems come when we believe all the thoughts and we don't even notice that the thoughts are playing a role or that they're kind of going in action in our day. So when we can start to notice our thoughts and we can start to step back and observe them and realize that most of what we think is not actually true, then we start to separate out ourselves from the thought and we can step back from some of the intensity of the thoughts, and it gives us room to then act and respond in different ways. We can do that by observing them and using diffusion strategies. We also, once we notice our thoughts, can also look for, is this thought true? What's the evidence for it true? What's the way I can challenge this thought? How can I replace it with a more positive or more helpful thought? One of the things that we can do, so now moving into when we challenge and replace, we can purposely or consciously or mindfully, probably is the best word to use, we can mindfully start to choose to have more positive thoughts, and also including affirmations. So this is not the same as like doing toxic positive thinking. So sometimes when people are trying to change their thoughts, as soon as a negative thought or a challenging thought comes in their brain, they try to say like, no, 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 and they try to think positively and replace it right away. Again, that's usually not really effective because they're trying to like suppress or stop any painful thought and like constantly like kind of catch it to replace it with something more positive. That actually can create more stress and more struggle in the long run. However, once we do the diffusion, and we realize this is just a thought, and we can say this is another thought that I prefer or feels more effective or feels more healthy for me. So when we move into positive thinking in that way, it's more helpful. So again, if I notice I have a thought that's like, self-critical, I can say I want to think about myself in a more positive way. Or if I have a challenge, instead of saying like nothing's going to work out and I'm not going to be able to do it, say like I'm going to do the best that I can. So being able to have positive statements that you can use can be really helpful. Again, when we have habitual thoughts, and if those habitual thoughts are more problematic or more negative, it's sometimes can be effort required and work and repetition to help us be able to learn how to have and make new pathways of more positive thinking. So repetition and practice is important. And so one specific type of positive thinking is called affirmations. And so the affirmations are usually short and simple phrases that you can repeat regularly to yourself. And there is evidence to kind of show that this is effective practice, and it does help to improve our well-being and helps to have more healthy ways of thinking. So affirmations are often really helpful if they are targeted towards, your own particular struggles. So going back again, maybe what I'll ask you to do at this point is like you did before when you thought about some of your thoughts that may be problematic for you. If there's a particular thoughts about yourself or about life or things like that you feel like you think a lot, if there's an opposite statement that you can say, that would be one that you can make into an affirmation. So on this little picture, there's like a few little affirmation examples, like I'm getting healthier every day, I'm an unstoppable force of nature, I am strong, today will be a productive day. And they're not a coincidence that they're on sticky notes, because sometimes that's a helpful way to start to practice affirmations, is to write them down somewhere visible where you can be reminded to see them. Lots of people find it helpful to put affirmations, for example, on their bathroom mirror so that they see them when they're getting ready in the morning and they start to say their affirmations, or also when they're going to bed at night, they can say their affirmations. So we're going to watch another little video here now to kind of talk a bit about positive thinking and how that can help us in our mental health and our overall wellness.
Audiences on Spotify don't just pay
First
attention,
commercial.
they show up with intention. Advertisers like you crave that kind of devotion.
I think we can't skip
So,
it yet.
are you ready to talk to fans?
We got another one coming up. Just bear with me.
When you have everything you need to start strong, you can.
I'm here to talk to Dr. Mark Bunnage. My role at Vertex is to lead our global research and development strategy and trying to understand the biology of
A few more
disease, then come
commercials than
forward with
expected for
potential
this one.
medicine to treat that disease. That's what motivates me and my team every single day.
What I take away from this research and from related research is that our view of the world has a fundamental tendency to tilt toward the negative. It's pretty easy to go from good to bad, but far harder to shift from bad to good. We literally have to work harder to see the upside of things. And this matters. So think about the economy. Here's economic well-being from 2007 to 2010. And you can see it tanked, just like we all remember. And then by late 2010, it had recovered by most objective measures. But here's consumer confidence over the same time period. You can see it tanks right along with the economy, but then it seems to get stuck. Instead of rebounding with the economy itself, consumers seem to be psychologically stuck back there in the recession. So oddly then, it may take more effort to change our minds about how the economy is doing than to change the economy itself. On a more personal level, what this research means to me is that you have to work to see the upside. Literally, this takes work. This takes effort. And you can practice this. You can train your mind to do this better. There's research out of UC Davis showing that just writing for a few minutes each day about things that you're grateful for can dramatically boost your happiness and well-being and even your health. We can also rehearse good news and share it with others. We tend to think, right, that misery loves company, that venting will help get rid of our negative emotions, that we'll feel better if we just talk about how terrible our day was. And so we talk, and we talk, and we talk about the boss who's driving us crazy, and the friend who never called us back, and the meeting at work where every little thing that could go wrong did. But we forget to talk about the good stuff. And yet that's exactly where our minds need the most practice. So my husband, who has this disconcerting habit of listening to what I say other people should do, and then pointing out that technically speaking, I'm a person too, has taken to listening to me for about 2 minutes on days when I come home all grumpy and complaining about everything. And he listens and he says, okay, but what happened today that was good? And so I tell him about the student who came up to me after class with this really interesting, insightful question. And I tell him about the friend who emailed me out of the blue this morning just to say hello. And somewhere in the telling, I start to smile. And I start to think that maybe my day was pretty decent after all. I think we can also work in our communities to focus on the upside. We can be more aware that bad tends to stick. One mean comment can stick with somebody all day, all week even. And bad tends to propagate itself, right? Somebody snaps at you and you snap back and you snap at the next guy too. But what if the next time somebody snapped at you, you forgave them? What if the next time you had a really grumpy waitress, you left her an extra large tip? Our minds may be built to look for negative information and to hold on to it. But we can also retrain our minds if we put some effort into it and start to see that the glass may be a little more full than we initially thought. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a nice summary of some of the things we've been talking about today, like again, how our brain is wired to look for things that might be threatening or dangerous, and it doesn't differentiate between someone snapping at us or we're ostracized and left alone in the group, you know, to live on our own, which would be harmful in our survival brain. So being able to then use our more evolved, complex brain as human beings to be able to have other things that we can draw upon. And so consciously and intentionally seeking out and creating those pathways of thinking too. I want to stress again, though, it doesn't mean that we can never have times to vent or times to talk through difficult things. In fact, again, it means that we have more peace at having like difficult thoughts or painful thoughts, because we can see that those thoughts are normal, and they make sense, but we also don't have to stay stuck in them. That's the point, I guess, of how we change our relationship with our thoughts. So just again, to kind of go back to the positive thinking and the affirmations, I asked you to think about something that would be a common thought that you might have, and how you can turn that into an affirmation. I know if you have been struggling for a while, and if your thought patterns do tend to be more critical or fear-based, it can be challenging actually to think about affirmations. So there's lots of resources out there that you can look up to get lists of affirmations or examples of affirmations, because it might actually even be hard for you to think about, like, what would I even say, or what would it look like to try to talk more positively. So feel free, in addition to this video, just to kind of Google like a list of affirmations, for example, or lists of positive thoughts. You don't have to adopt all of them at once. Maybe just finding one or two that really resonate with you for the opposite of like what you might be struggling with. So these are some just examples. Usually affirmations are written in the present tense, like not like I'm going to or I will. They're written as if they are happening right now. And they are written like from I will do this, or I recognize, or, so they're personal, like they're not just like out there arbitrary for other people. So being able to frame your affirmations in this way. So I encourage you to identify maybe just one or two, not too many, because it gets too overwhelming, but start with one or two affirmations and see what it feels like to say these to yourself, not just once a day, but maybe even multiple times a day. And the next thing we're going to talk about is gratitude. Oops. So connected to affirmations and for sure connected to positive thinking is the practice of gratitude. So it's been researched to show that if we practice gratitude, and we say practice gratitude as an intentional thing, because it does require practice, because it's not, again, a way our survival brain generally works. So gratitude is something that we can choose to practice, and it can impact our thoughts, and it can then impact our mental health in a positive way. I know this picture on the slide is a little bit blurry, but just this quote here, which is in the video that's going to come up with Brené Brown, it says, "It's not joy that makes us grateful, it's gratitude that makes us joyful." And it's a really positive switch around to kind of help us think about, the connection between gratitude and joy. On this picture, it says, what is gratitude? It is acknowledging the good in one's life. It's a helpful, self-soothing practice. It's a feeling and a practice. So gratitude is both a way you can feel, but it's also a behavior that you can cultivate. Gratitude is not forcing positive emotions. It's not telling ourselves that others have it worse. And it's not saying I should feel or I should not feel. So that's not what gratitude's about. So even in the most difficult times in our life, we can look for things that maybe we may be able to feel gratitude for. For example, even if we have experienced the death of a loved one, maybe we are grateful for the family that comes around us to support us through that grief. Maybe we're grateful for the relationship we had with that person who's passed away. Maybe we're grateful for the ability to feel our own feelings of sadness and to allow ourselves space to grieve. Maybe in that sadness, we might look out and see a flower blooming, and we can still be grateful that, there's beautiful things in nature. We might get up in the morning and have a piece of toast and be grateful for that piece of toast. So within difficult times, there's still maybe little moments where we can notice things that can be worth acknowledging, and especially in like pleasant times, like we might want to just be grateful for the experience of those pleasant times in our life. So for gratitude, you can actually, some people like go so formal as to have gratitude journals where they specifically write down, whether it's every day or a couple times a week, things that they're grateful for. You can just mentally stop in your day and think about what's happened in your day. Or as you're going through your day, again, you can have a mental filter that's helpful and say, I want to mentally filter things that are, gratitude inducing through my day. So any of those ways are really positive ways to practice gratitude. And I also want to stress with gratitude, it does not have to be really big, grand things to be grateful for. It could be, I'm grateful for this comfortable pair of sneakers that I get to put on. I'm grateful for the ability to turn on my tap and have hot water whenever I want it. I'm grateful for my favorite bag of chips, like whatever it might be that brings you some moment of appreciation. And sometimes if we can appreciate those little small things in life, it actually is more fulfilling than waiting for the big things to practice gratitude for. Okay. Oh. So I'm going to skip this and we're going to go to the conclusion here now. So we've kind of covered a lot of different things around managing our thoughts. It is one of the more complex and tricky things in terms of mental health. There's some other Wellness Wednesdays videos that intersect with this presentation. So feel free to look at the list of Wellness Wednesdays videos where you found this one and see if any of the other ones resonate with you to help you, because as we looked at in the triangle, managing our body's response and changing our behaviors, they're all part of the triangle. So sometimes when we change those things, it also can help us change our thoughts too. We also have a video on managing triggers. So sometimes when we do that, it also can help us. So everything intersects and all kind of works together as we're trying to develop tools to improve our mental health. I also wanted just to cover a few other resources that are available. Again, for some of you, this might be sufficient and might be helpful to get you going in a positive direction. Other people might be looking for some more things. All the resources on this page are listed on Bridge the Gap. So Bridge the Gap is the last thing on the slide, but it's where actually all these other tools are located. So if you go to Bridge the Gap, you'll be able to find information on LifeWise, which is a peer support group in the province, has trained peer supporters that offer one-on-one support and group support and run a warm line. So that's a really great resource if you want to just chat with somebody around what you're dealing with. They have lots of really wonderful staff to be involved. There's also on Bridge the Gap some programs around anxiety and depression through the Adult ICANN Anxiety and Depression programs. So you can sign up on Bridge the Gap and do those. There's also another online program called Mind Well You, which has a mindfulness challenge there, which is really a great thing to try. And mindfulness certainly helps with coping with our thoughts. On Bridge the Gap, there's also a resource called Therapist Assisted Online. We call it TAO for short. TAO has two different streams. One you can do completely on your own at your own pace. Another one is a therapist assisted one where you meet with a counselor once a week or so and just talk through the modules that you're doing online. And so they have resources on specific modules on addressing our thoughts. And then from TAO, there are some online short programs that have been created. So it kind of pulls out some of the modules and puts them under headings. So there's some there that are also helpful in coping with our thoughts. And I do want to stress and point out the service of Doorways, which is through NL Health Services. And it's how you can quickly and most easily access mental health services through NL Health. So there are Doorways clinics all across the province. If you just Google your closest health center or hub kind of community and Doorways, you will find your local Doorways clinic and its location and its hours of operation. So Doorways clinics, you can usually are able to access an appointment with a counselor fairly quickly, and it's a great way to explore your options and see what your needs are in terms of any one-on-one support that you might be looking for. And as I said already, like, feel free to look through the list of other Wellness Wednesdays videos, because overall, just as I said at the beginning of the session, being able to access accurate and relevant information for your mental health is one of the most important things for being on the journey of recovery. So I want to thank you again for taking the time to watch this video, and want to again give you a lot of recognition and credit if you were able to stick it out and watch the whole video and hopefully have some takeaways for yourself. If you feel so inclined, you can use this evaluation to provide some feedback on this session or any of the other sessions. We do value this feedback, and we use it to create new programs or modify or improve the services that we have. So if you would like to take a moment and fill out the evaluation, that would be greatly appreciated. And I will end things here. And again, I hope that you found this session helpful and you have some takeaways that you can use to apply in your day-to-day life. Thank you very much.